I had been working at Westbridge Consulting Group for a little over 4 years when everything in my life started changing in ways I never expected. At 32, I had built what I thought was a stable career. I worked as a senior operations coordinator for one of the company's corporate strategy divisions, managing internal projects, handling communication between departments, preparing reports for executive meetings, and basically making sure entire teams stayed organized enough to hit impossible deadlines. It wasn't glamorous work. Most people outside corporate environments imagined office jobs as people casually typing on laptops while drinking overpriced coffee and attending meetings that could have been emails. The reality was much uglier. Constant deadlines, endless spreadsheets, managers changing priorities every few hours, clients demanding impossible revisions at the last second. Entire weeks where you barely notice whether it was Monday or Friday. Still, I genuinely loved what I did. I like structure. I like solving operational problems. I like the strange satisfaction that came from watching a complicated project come together after weeks of pressure. By then, I had developed a pretty solid reputation inside the company. People trusted me. Senior managers requested me specifically for difficult client accounts. Even executives sometimes reached out directly when they needed internal coordination handled properly. It had taken years to build that level of trust, and I was proud of it. Looking back now, I think that pride was exactly why what happened next affected me so deeply. It started when the company hired Daniel. Officially, his position was project development manager, but internally everybody understood what that meant. Upper management was grooming him for leadership. The first time I met him was during our quarterly strategy meeting. I remember sitting near the conference room window, finishing notes for a presentation, when our department director Karen walked in with him standing beside her. He was probably around 35. Perfect suit. Perfect smile. The kind of person who looked like he had spent his entire life learning how to impress people. Karen introduced him to the team. Everyone, this is Daniel Mercer. He'll be joining our division starting today and helping oversee our client development initiatives. Everybody politely smiled. Daniel shook hands with several people before stopping in front of me. "And you are?" "Emily," I said. Karen immediately jumped in. "She's one of our strongest operations coordinators. Honestly, half this department would collapse without her." Daniel smiled. "Well then," he said. "Looks like I'll be learning from you." At the time I thought nothing of it. In fact, I remember feeling optimistic. New managers often meant new opportunities, especially when promotions were being discussed for the following quarter. For the first 2 weeks, everything seemed normal. Daniel was charismatic. Very charismatic. He learned everyone's names unusually fast. He stayed late every evening. He volunteered for extra client meetings. Upper management clearly liked him. A little too much, actually. I first noticed something strange during a meeting with one of our largest software clients. I had spent nearly 3 weeks building a workflow restructuring proposal for them. It was one of those massive internal optimization projects involving budget forecasts, staffing projections, implementation schedules, dozens of moving pieces. I walked into the meeting expecting to present everything myself. Instead, Daniel stood up before I could even open my laptop. "I'll take lead on this one," he said casually. I frowned. "Oh, I thought I was presenting?" He smiled without even looking at me. "I reviewed your material last night. I made a few adjustments. I think I can streamline it better." Before I could respond, Karen nodded. "Sounds good." I sat there silently while Daniel spent 40 minutes presenting my project, my numbers, my research, my strategy framework, even my slide formatting. At one point, the client interrupted. "This is very thorough. How long did this take to prepare?" Daniel smiled confidently. "Been refining it for a few weeks." I remember physically freezing in my chair. I looked toward Karen. She said nothing. After the meeting ended, I followed Daniel into the hallway. "What exactly was that?" He turned calmly. "What do you mean?" "That was my presentation." He adjusted his jacket. "Well, technically we're all on the same team." I stared at him. "You took credit for 3 weeks of my work." He laughed softly. "Emily, you're looking at this emotionally." I could feel anger building. "That project was assigned to me." He lowered his voice. You should learn something early. I folded my arms. Learn what? In this company, visibility matters more than effort. Then he walked away. I stood there in the hallway staring after him for almost 30 seconds. At the time, I convinced myself maybe it was just a misunderstanding. Maybe he was trying to impress leadership. Maybe he genuinely didn't realize how inappropriate that looked. I wanted to believe that. But over the next month, the pattern started repeating. Again, and again, and again. I'd spend days preparing internal reports. Suddenly Daniel would volunteer to present on behalf of the team. I'd build project timelines. Later I'd hear executives complimenting Daniel for excellent planning. I'd write strategy summaries. Then receive meeting invitations where Daniel discussed his new process improvements. First I thought maybe people noticed. Surely coworkers were seeing what was happening. One afternoon I was sitting in the break room when Jessica from finance sat beside me. She lowered her voice immediately. You know everybody sees what he's doing, right? I looked up from my coffee. Then why is nobody saying anything? She sighed. Because Karen loves him. I stared at her. What does that mean? Jessica leaned closer. Daniel came from Karen's previous company. That immediately explained everything. I had wondered why upper management trusted him so quickly. Jessica continued. They worked together for years before coming here. So he has protection. Basically. I sat there quietly. Jessica gave me a sympathetic look. You need to be careful. Careful of what? She hesitated. He wants your position. I laughed. My position? He's been asking questions about your accounts. I could feel tension forming in my stomach. That evening, I stayed almost 2 hours later than usual finishing reports for a pharmaceutical client account. Around 8:15 p.m., I noticed Daniel walking past my desk. He stopped. You work late often? Sometimes. He looked at my monitor. That account still yours? I turned slightly. Why? No reason. He smiled again. That smile. I had started noticing something deeply unsettling about it. It never reached his eyes. Then he walked away. I remember sitting there in complete silence after he left. For the first time in years, I felt uncomfortable coming to work. Not stressed. Not tired. Not overworked. Something worse. Like I was slowly becoming a target without understanding why. And unfortunately, I had absolutely no idea how much worse things were about to get. 3 days later, I walked into the office at 8:40 in the morning. The entire department felt strangely quiet. Nobody was talking. People kept glancing toward my desk. Jessica stood up immediately when she saw me. Her face looked pale. Emily. I frowned. What happened? She looked genuinely nervous. You need to check your email. I sat down quickly and opened Outlook. At the top of my inbox sat a message marked high priority. It had been sent company-wide. Over 200 employees copied. Sender. Daniel Mercer. Subject line. Concerns regarding operational integrity in Project Management Division. My stomach dropped instantly. I clicked the message open. And the moment I started reading, I realized somebody had just declared war on my career. I must have read that email 5 times before my brain fully processed what I was seeing. The message was written carefully. Too carefully. It wasn't openly accusing me of anything illegal or unethical, but every sentence had been structured in a way that planted doubt. Daniel had written that over the past several weeks, he had observed concerning inconsistencies in project reporting procedures within operations management. Then he listed examples. Several delayed approval submissions. Budget discrepancies in 2 active client accounts. Missed internal deadlines. Communication failures between departments. And somehow, every single example pointed directly back to projects I had been managing. At the bottom of the email, he wrote, I believe maintaining operational transparency is critical to preserving client trust and company standards. Leadership should review whether certain internal procedures are currently being handled appropriately. No direct accusation, but he had just publicly suggested to the entire company that I was incompetent, possibly negligent, maybe worse. I sat frozen at my desk. Jessica stood beside me quietly. This is bad, she whispered. I looked around the office. People were pretending not to stare. But they were staring. Everyone had seen it. 200 employees. 200 people now wondering whether I had somehow been mishandling company accounts. My phone rang. Internal extension. Karen. I answered immediately. Emily, conference room 3. Now. No greeting. No explanation. I stood up slowly. My legs actually felt weak. Jessica gave me a worried look as I walked away. Inside conference room 3, Karen sat at the table with Daniel beside her. Both had laptops open. Neither looked surprised to see me. Karen gestured toward the chair. Sit down. I sat. Daniel folded his hands calmly like this was just another normal Tuesday. Karen started speaking immediately. We've received concerns regarding your recent project management performance. I stared at her. Concerns from who? Daniel spoke first. I've noticed several irregularities while reviewing your recent accounts. I turned toward him. You mean the accounts you inserted yourself into without permission? Karen cut me off sharply. Emily, this isn't the time for defensiveness. I looked back at her. Defensiveness? He just sent a company-wide email implying I'm failing at my job. Karen sighed. Daniel has identified legitimate workflow inconsistencies. I could feel heat rising in my face. No. Daniel has been interfering in my projects for 6 weeks. Daniel leaned back calmly. I'm trying to improve efficiency. You've been taking credit for my work. Karen's voice hardened. That accusation is inappropriate. I stared at both of them. Suddenly everything became very clear. This wasn't accidental. This wasn't misunderstanding. This had been planned. Karen finally slid a printed document across the table. I looked down. It was labeled, Performance Review Investigation. My stomach tightened. Karen continued. Until we complete an internal review, we're temporarily reassigning 3 of your active client accounts. I looked up slowly. What? Daniel answered. I'll be overseeing them. Of course he would. I sat there speechless for several seconds. 3 major accounts. Nearly 40% of my department workload. Projects I had personally spent months building. Karen stood up. We expect full cooperation. The meeting ended. Just like that. 10 minutes. And years of reputation inside the company suddenly meant nothing. I walked back to my desk feeling like everyone in the office was watching me. Because they were. Nobody said anything. Nobody moved. I sat down mechanically. Jessica leaned over. What happened? I stared at the monitor. They took my accounts. Her eyes widened. You're serious? I nodded. She cursed quietly under her breath. For the rest of the day I barely worked. My inbox started filling with messages from confused clients. Apparently Daniel had already begun contacting them. Several emails said things like, I understand I'll be handling your account moving forward. I've reviewed the recent operational concerns. I'll be correcting several previous workflow inefficiencies. He was actively telling my clients I had mishandled their projects. I felt sick. At 6 p.m. I finally left the office. The entire drive home felt surreal. I lived alone in a small apartment downtown. Nothing luxurious. Just a quiet place close enough to commute. Normally after work I'd cook dinner, answer a few pending emails, maybe watch something mindless before sleeping. That night I couldn't focus on anything. I sat at the kitchen table replaying the entire day over and over. Something wasn't adding up. Those mistakes Daniel listed in the email. Some of them weren't real. I knew they weren't real. I had personally reviewed every single report before submission. Then a horrible thought hit me. I grabbed my laptop immediately, logged into the company cloud server, opened archived project records. And there it was. I felt cold instantly. Several files had been edited. Recent timestamps. Budget sheets I remembered finalizing had suddenly changed numbers. Approval logs had missing signatures. Deadline schedules had altered submission dates. I opened metadata. The edits were recent. Very recent. Some were changed late the previous night. I stared at the screen for almost a minute, then checked user activity logs. One name kept appearing. Daniel Mercer. I whispered out loud. No way. He had altered my files. He had intentionally changed project records, then used those fabricated errors against me. I immediately started taking screenshots. Every file, every timestamp, every edit log, nearly 40 screenshots. At that moment, I finally understood something terrifying. Daniel wasn't competing with me. He was systematically removing me, and Karen was helping him. The next morning, I walked into work prepared. For the first time in my career, I wasn't going to stay quiet. At 9:15, I requested an immediate meeting with Human Resources. Normally, internal HR appointments took several days. Mine was approved within 30 minutes, probably because of Daniel's company-wide accusation email. At 10 a.m., I entered HR manager Rebecca's office. She was in her early 40s, very professional, very corporate. She motioned for me to sit. I understand there are concerns regarding recent project performance. I placed my laptop on the desk. There are concerns, I said calmly, but not mine. Her expression shifted slightly. I turned the laptop toward her. These are server logs. She leaned closer. I opened the first screenshot. This budget report was altered at 11:42 p.m. last night. Second screenshot. This client approval sheet was modified after final submission. Third screenshot. This workflow schedule had dates manually changed. Rebecca stared silently. I clicked another file. Every edit traces back to one employee. She looked at me. Who? I rotated the screen fully. Large text sat at the top of the log. User access record. Daniel Mercer. Rebecca stopped talking. I kept going. For 6 weeks he's inserted himself into my accounts, taken credit for my work, manipulated reporting structures, and yesterday publicly accused me of incompetence using data he personally altered. She stared at the evidence. For the first time, I could see genuine concern on her face. She spoke quietly. Have you shown anyone else this? No. Does Karen know? I laughed bitterly. Karen has protected him from day one. Rebecca sat back slowly, then said something I wasn't expecting. Emily, I need you not to discuss this with anyone for now. I narrowed my eyes. What does that mean? It means. She hesitated. This situation may be much larger than we initially understood. Something in the way she said that made my stomach tighten. I asked carefully, what exactly does larger mean? Rebecca looked toward the closed office door, then lowered her voice. We've had similar complaints. I stared at her. Similar complaints? She nodded slowly. 3 employees transferred departments after filing concerns involving Daniel. I felt my chest tighten. What kind of concerns? She answered quietly. Project interference. Credit theft. Unauthorized file access. I sat there stunned. This had happened before. I asked the obvious question. Then why is he still here? Rebecca looked uncomfortable, then finally said 2 words that changed everything. Executive protection. I frowned. What? She exhaled slowly. Daniel has personal connections with senior leadership. Suddenly the room felt smaller. I understood now. This entire company had been protecting him. Not just Karen. Not just management. Higher people. Far higher. Rebecca closed my laptop gently, then looked directly at me. And what she said next honestly scared me more than Daniel himself. Emily. She paused. You need to understand something very carefully. I stared at her. She lowered her voice even more. If you formally push this investigation, people at the top are going to come after you. I sat perfectly still. And for the first time in years, I seriously began wondering whether I was about to lose everything I had spent my entire adult life building. I barely slept that night. Rebecca's words kept replaying in my head. People at the top are going to come after you. For almost 5 years, I had believed hard work inside corporate environments actually mattered. You perform well. You deliver results. You stay reliable. Eventually, your career grows. Simple. At least that was the illusion I had been living under. Now I was realizing something far uglier. Sometimes performance meant nothing when the wrong people decided they wanted your place. Around midnight, I opened my laptop again and started organizing every piece of evidence I had. Server logs, modified spreadsheets, email chains, calendar invitations, project assignment records. The more I reviewed everything, the more disturbing the pattern became. Daniel hadn't simply sabotaged me over 6 weeks. He had been carefully studying my entire workflow system. I found internal documents he had accessed months earlier, accounts he had no authorization to review, archived project files from clients I managed nearly a year before he joined my department. I stared at the access history. This wasn't random ambition. This had been planned before he officially started targeting me. I finally shut my laptop around 2:30 in the morning. For hours later, my alarm went off. I seriously considered not going to work. But I refused to disappear. That was probably exactly what Daniel wanted. When I arrived at the office, the atmosphere felt different immediately. Conversations stopped when I entered. 2 analysts near the elevator suddenly looked away. Nobody smiled. Nobody greeted me. I walked toward my desk, then stopped. My computer was gone. The monitor. The docking station. Even the project folders I kept in locked drawers. Everything had been cleared. For a moment I thought maybe facilities was doing maintenance. Then I noticed the envelope sitting neatly in the middle of my desk. My name was written on the front. I opened it. Inside sat a single printed document. Notice of administrative suspension. I read the first paragraph 3 times. Pending internal investigation regarding concerns surrounding operational misconduct, employee Emily Carter is hereby suspended effective immediately until further notice. Suspended. I felt my pulse accelerating. Behind me I heard footsteps. Karen. She stood beside my desk holding a tablet. Her expression looked completely emotionless. Please hand over your building access card. I turned slowly. You suspended me? She crossed her arms. This investigation requires temporary action. I stared at her. Because Daniel altered company records? Her eyes narrowed slightly. Careful what accusations you make. I actually laughed. I couldn't help it. Not because anything was funny. It was pure disbelief. You're protecting him. Karen's voice sharpened immediately. Lower your voice. I ignored her. You know he manipulated my files. Several employees nearby were openly watching now. Karen stepped closer. Emily, if you continue creating disruption, security will escort you out. I looked around the office. People I had worked beside for years. People whose projects I had saved countless times. People who knew exactly what Daniel had been doing. Nobody said a word. Not one person. I reached into my bag, pulled out my access card, dropped it into Karen's hand. Then I leaned forward and said quietly enough that only she could hear me, "This is going to destroy all of you." For the first time, I saw uncertainty flash across her face. I turned around and walked toward the elevators. Nobody stopped me. The second I got into my car, my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. Hello. A male voice responded. Emily. Yes. This is Mark Sullivan. I frowned. I'm sorry, who? There was a brief pause. Former senior analyst. I used to work on Daniel's previous team. My entire body stiffened. How did you get my number? I heard what happened this morning. I stayed silent. He continued. I know what Daniel is doing to you. My grip tightened on the steering wheel. What do you mean? Mark exhaled slowly. Because he did the exact same thing to me 2 years ago. I sat there frozen. He kept talking. I worked with Daniel at Harrington Group before he joined Westbridge. I immediately opened notes on my phone. Tell me everything. There was bitterness in his voice now. He stole one of my corporate restructuring proposals, presented it as his own during executive review. I listened carefully. When I confronted him, he started sabotaging my internal reporting records. Exactly like me. Mark continued. Suddenly I was missing deadlines I had already completed. Financial projections were being altered after submission. Clients were told I had performance issues. I interrupted. How did nobody notice? He laughed quietly. Oh, they noticed. That answer unsettled me. What happened? Daniel's uncle sits on the executive board. I stopped breathing for a second. What? That's how he keeps getting protected. Everything suddenly connected. Karen's behavior. Rebecca's warning. Executive protection. This entire system had been shielding him for years. Mark kept talking. I filed formal complaints. And They forced me to resign. I stared through the windshield silently, then asked carefully, "Why are you helping me now?" His answer came immediately. "Because I should have fought harder." For nearly an hour he told me everything. There had been others. 3 employees in his previous company. 2 employees at Westbridge before me. Same pattern every time. Daniel identified high-performing employees, studied their work, inserted himself into their projects, created dependency with upper management, then systematically destroyed their credibility and took over their accounts. I finally asked the obvious question. Why? Mark answered without hesitation. He's building his executive portfolio. I frowned. What does that mean? Every successful account he steals improves his promotion track. I leaned back against the seat. I suddenly understood. Daniel wasn't targeting me personally. I was simply useful. Another stepping stone. Another career to dismantle so he could climb faster. Before ending the call, Mark said something important. Check archived server backups. What? Daniel deletes original file history eventually. I immediately grabbed my laptop from the passenger seat, connected to remote company server access, started checking historical backups. Then I found it. A folder I had never accessed before. Hidden internal audit logs. I opened the records, and my entire stomach dropped. This was bigger than Daniel. Much bigger. Dozens of internal financial reports had been altered. Not just my accounts. Large corporate accounts. Budget reallocations. Contract modifications. Internal approval signatures overwritten. Millions of dollars worth of client reporting adjustments. I stared at the numbers. This wasn't career sabotage anymore. This looked like corporate fraud. Real fraud. The kind that could destroy entire companies. I immediately called Rebecca from HR. She answered instantly. "Emily." I spoke fast. "Daniel isn't just sabotaging employees. What are you talking about?" "I found audit logs." Silence. Then I heard her breathing change. "What logs?" "Financial account modifications. Executive approvals changed retroactively." Several seconds passed. Then Rebecca said quietly, "Oh my God." I continued. "It goes back almost 3 years." She spoke again. And this time her voice sounded genuinely frightened. "Emily." "Yes. You need to leave wherever you are right now." I frowned. "What?" Her tone became urgent. "Do not go home." My heart immediately started racing. "Rebecca, what's happening?" Then she said 5 words I will never forget. "They know you found it." The line suddenly disconnected. I stared at the dead screen, then looked up through the windshield. That was the exact moment I noticed the black SUV parked directly across from my car. Engine running. 2 men sitting inside. Watching me. Neither moved. Neither looked away. And somehow, I knew with absolute certainty, this situation had just stopped being about my job. For about 5 seconds I didn't move. I just sat there gripping my phone so tightly my fingers started hurting. The black SUV remained parked 20 meters ahead of me near the opposite side of the lot. Both men inside were staring directly in my direction. No movement. No conversation. Just watching. My pulse was pounding so hard I could hear it. I forced myself to breathe and look down at my phone again. Rebecca had hung up. I tried calling her back immediately. Straight to voicemail. Something deep in my gut told me this was no longer office politics. I started the engine. The second my headlights turned on, the SUV moved. Not fast. Deliberately. Like they wanted me to notice. I pulled out of the parking space. 3 seconds later they followed. I turned right toward downtown traffic. They turned right. I switched lanes suddenly. They switched lanes too. That was enough confirmation. I grabbed my phone again and called the only person I could think of. "Jessica." She answered almost instantly. "Emily? What's going on?" I kept my eyes on the rearview mirror. "Listen carefully. I need you to tell me if Rebecca is still in the office." Jessica sounded confused. I think so. Why?" "Just check." A pause. I could hear movement. 30 seconds later she came back. "Her office is empty." My chest tightened. "What do you mean empty?" "I mean literally empty. Her laptop's gone." I stared at the road. That was bad. Very bad. Jessica lowered her voice. Emily. 2 executives just showed up on our floor. What executives? CFO and legal department. That confirmed it. Whatever I had found in those audit logs had reached far beyond Daniel. I asked quickly, Jessica, has Daniel been there? Another pause. Then she answered quietly. He's smiling. I ended the call immediately. At that moment I stopped thinking like an employee. I started thinking like someone trying to survive. I drove straight toward the only place I knew would force immediate protection. Federal Financial Compliance Bureau. Our company handled massive corporate consulting contracts involving international finance accounts. If there was internal fraud involving client money, federal investigators would care. The SUV stayed behind me for nearly 15 minutes. Every turn, every lane change, every stoplight, still there. Finally, I pulled into the underground parking garage of a federal office building downtown. Security gates blocked public access. I rolled toward visitor check-in. The SUV slowed behind me, then stopped. One of the men inside pulled out his phone. Watching me, I practically ran through security screening. The receptionist looked startled. Ma'am, are you all right? I placed my laptop on the counter. I need to report corporate financial fraud immediately. She blinked. I'm sorry. I opened the laptop, pulled up the audit files, server logs, financial records, approval modifications. Her expression changed instantly. Please wait here. 2 minutes later, 2 federal investigators walked into the lobby. One older woman, one younger man carrying a tablet. The woman introduced herself. Special Investigator Laura Bennett. She motioned toward a conference room. Come with us. For the next 2 hours I explained everything. Daniel, Karen, the project's sabotage, the altered files, the executive connections, the hidden audit logs. They barely interrupted. Laura occasionally asked specific questions. Do you have access to original timestamps? Yes. Can you prove unauthorized account modification? Yes. Do these files leave internal digital signatures? Yes. The younger investigator finally looked up from his notes. How many employees know you discovered this? I thought carefully. Rebecca from HR. Laura immediately focused on me. Anyone else? No. She exchanged a glance with her partner. Not a good glance. I asked quietly. What happens now? Laura closed her notebook. We're opening a formal investigation immediately. I nodded slowly. Then she said something unexpected. You're not going home tonight. I stared at her. What? We need to keep you somewhere secure until we understand who inside the company is involved. The weight of the situation finally hit me fully. This was real. Actual federal investigation. Corporate fraud. Potential criminal charges. And somehow, I had become the person who accidentally exposed all of it. That night I stayed in a government-arranged hotel under temporary witness protection procedures. I barely slept. At 7 a.m. the following morning, my phone exploded with notifications. Over 40 messages. Mostly coworkers. I opened the first one from Jessica. Emily, turn on the news. I immediately opened a live business news stream. And there it was. The headline covered the entire screen. Federal investigation launched into Westbridge Consulting Group after internal fraud allegations. My stomach turned. The reporter continued speaking. Authorities had entered company headquarters shortly after midnight. Servers had been seized. Senior executives were being questioned. Financial investigators were reviewing internal contract modifications involving millions in altered client reporting structures. Then came the part that shocked me. 3 executive officers had already been detained, including CFO Richard Hammond and Karen. I stared silently. A second message came from Jessica. Daniel got arrested this morning. I physically stopped breathing for a second. I turned the volume higher. The reporter continued. Authorities had identified several internal employees responsible for manipulating financial reports and altering operational records over multiple years. One individual allegedly responsible for internal employee targeting and falsified project documentation. Daniel Mercer. I leaned back against the hotel bed. It was over. Or at least I thought it was. 2 days later, I met with federal investigators again. Laura placed several printed documents on the table. We completed preliminary digital forensics. I looked down. There were dozens of pages. Laura spoke calmly. Daniel wasn't simply sabotaging employees for promotions. I frowned. What do you mean? She folded her hands. He was identifying high-performing employees whose projects involved high-value financial accounts. I listened carefully. She continued. Once he gained control of those accounts, he altered contract structures and rerouted consulting allocations. I stared at her. How much money? She looked at her notes. Rough estimate. $8.6 million. I felt physically sick. $8 million. Laura kept speaking. Karen approved internal reporting concealment, and senior executives ignored audit inconsistencies because they were receiving compensation. I sat there speechless. For years I had believed I worked inside a respectable consulting firm. Turns out I had spent 4 years unknowingly surrounded by organized corporate criminals. A week later, the company officially collapsed. All active contracts frozen. Stock value destroyed. Investors withdrew immediately. Hundreds of employees lost their jobs. The media coverage lasted nearly 2 weeks. Daniel's arrest photo appeared everywhere. Perfect hair. Perfect suit gone. Now sitting in handcuffs outside federal court. I watched the footage online late one night. And strangely, I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt exhausted. Months passed. Federal investigators kept contacting me as their primary witness. I gave multiple statements, turned over every digital record I had saved. Eventually, prosecutors offered me formal legal protection because my evidence had become central to the criminal case. Jessica stayed in touch the entire time. One afternoon she called me laughing. You know what's funny? I smiled faintly. What? 3 months ago Daniel thought he was stealing your promotion. I stared out my apartment window. She continued. Now he's looking at 15 years in federal prison. For the first time in weeks. I laughed. A genuine laugh. 6 months later, I accepted a position at another consulting firm. Smaller company. Far healthier environment. No politics. No executives playing power games. No toxic management structures. My first day there felt surreal. My new director walked me around the office introducing me to everyone. At the end she smiled and said, "We hired you because your reputation speaks for itself." That sentence stayed with me, because for months I had almost forgotten who I was. Daniel tried to erase everything I had built. My career. My credibility. My confidence. He treated people like stepping stones. Like careers were disposable. Like ambition justified destroying whoever stood in the way. But he made one mistake. He assumed I would stay quiet. And sometimes, the most dangerous thing you can do in corporate environments is underestimate the person doing all the real work behind the scenes. So yeah, that happened. And honestly, after everything I learned, I'll never look at office politics the same way again.